Our opening words, which are by Annie Dillard this morning. We are here to abet creation and to witness it, to notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature, so that creation need not play to an empty house. Come, let us worship together. This prayer I did write this week, you'll see. The English have a great expression for when things go wrong. They say it's all gone pear-shaped. As if life, which we have worked so hard to contain in a perfect circle, is bursting at the edges, bulging uncontrollably at our feeble attempts to encompass it. This is a prayer for those days that go pear-shaped. Days when computers go on the fritz, when children are forgotten outside the school, feet moving side to side to stay warm, expectant eyes searching every passing car. This is a prayer for the days when you can't stop dropping things, when you hold in your hands the chipped and broken pieces, and wish that you could go back in time and just for a moment have surer footing, a firmer grip, a filter for careless words. This is a prayer for the days when bad news arrives and you stand dumbstruck and think, this can't be real, this isn't happening. And for the next day, when you wake up and it's all still happening. In those moments and days which quickly outgrow the perfectly cultivated circumference of our planned lives, may you hold life gently, cup its yellow and bottom-heavy weight, caress its smooth curves. Take a bite and let the sugary juices run down your cheek. Although you asked for an apple, there is something beautiful about a pear. Beauty even in the pear-shaped day, the pear-shaped life, unpredictable and unbound, messy, ripe, and alive. Amen. Our reading this morning is by Robert Weston, The Web of Life. There is a living web that runs through us to all the universe, linking us each with each, and through all life on to distant stars. Each knows a little corner of the world and lives as if this were his all. We no more see the farther reaches of the threads than we see of the future, yet they're there. Touch but one thread, no matter which. The thoughtful eye may trace to distant lands its firm, continuing strand, yet lose its filaments as they reach out, but find at last it coming back to him from whom it led. We move as in a fog, aware of self, but only dimly conscious of the rest as they are close to us in sight or feeling. New objects loom up for a time, fade in and out. Then, sometimes, as we look on unawares, the fog lifts, and there's the web in shimmering beauty. Reaching past all horizons, we catch our breath, stretch out eager hands, and then in comes the fog again, and we go on, feeling a little foolish, doubting what we had seen. The hands were right. The web is real. Our folly is that we so soon forget. So I told you this sermon is from quite a while ago, and it's entitled Kevin Bacon and the Interdependent Web of All Existence. When I preached this sermon at a downtown Boston church, the sermon title was on the Wayside Pulpit for the week preceding, and I actually heard someone say, I think Kevin Bacon's going to be at the church this week. I hope they weren't too disappointed. But perhaps some of you have heard of the game 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. The idea behind the game is to try to link an actor or actress through the movies they've been in to actor Kevin Bacon in less than 6 steps. Here's an example from the book The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. O.J. Simpson was in Naked Gun with Priscilla Presley, who was in Ford Fairlane with Gilbert Gottfried, who was in Beverly Hills Cop 2 with Paul Reiser, who was in Diner with Kevin Bacon. That's 4 steps. Amazingly, this works with even the most far-removed actors you can think of. Another example from the book, Mary Pickford was in Screen Snapshots with Clark Gable, who was in Combat America with Tony Romano, who 35 years later was in Starting Over with Kevin Bacon. That's 3 steps. Although I am a big fan of Kevin Bacon movies, I'm not very good at playing this game. Your mind has to think like a spider's does, making web-like connections, extending out from the original focus, weaving in and out through names and films, making intricate and delicate patterns. It's just not how my brain works. But my brain and heart do like to think about this idea that all these people are connected if you think about it long enough. Of course, this phenomenon of 6 degrees of separation does not apply only to actors. Many of you are probably familiar with Stanley Milgram's experiment in the late 1960s that has made 6 degrees of separation a household phrase. Milgram experimented with this small world phenomenon through the use of a chain letter. He got the names of 160 people who lived in Omaha, Nebraska, and mailed each of them a packet along with the name and address of a stockbroker who worked in Boston and lived in Sharon, Massachusetts. Each person was told to write his or her name on the packet and send it to a friend or acquaintance who would be able to get the packet closer to the stockbroker. The people in Omaha sent these packets to cousins, college friends, ex-coworkers, anyone who lived closer to Boston and would be more likely to know the stockbroker. They, in turn, passed the packets on to others. Finally, 24 letters reached the stockbroker at his home in Sharon. Milgram found that most of the letters reached the stockbroker in 5 or 6 steps, thus the concept of 6 degrees of separation. Again, I am reminded of the spider's web. Again, I am awed by the threads connecting us all to each other. This image of the web is one that has been important in my ministry. In seminary, it was useful as I worked out my understanding of God as the interconnected web of life. As social action coordinator for the Mass Bay district of UU churches, I used this image of a web to help congregations feel more connected to one another in their social justice efforts. We are not working alone. We are working within a network, a web. And it is this ever-expanding connection to others which serves not only to make us a more powerful force for change in the world, but also as the reason we do social justice. At the UU Urban Ministry in Roxbury, I drew upon the web as an image that brought to life the idea that what affects one of us affects all of us, that though our circumstances may differ, we are not separate. We must care what is happening in the inner neighborhoods of Boston. Here in Provincetown, the web is no less real. I find that the health of our individual relationships affects the health of the whole meeting house. I see that how we hold each other when things fall apart makes visible the strands of care and connection that are God. In my life, it is not particularly meaningful to know that I could, if I wanted, get a letter to a stranger in Oklahoma in less than 6 steps. What matters is the recognition that we are connected to others in our lives, so many others. We are connected statistically, yes, but we are also connected emotionally. With our minds, yes, but also with our hearts, with our hopes, with our needs and dreams. The 7th principle of Unitarian Universalism is respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Growing up, I thought of the 7th principle as the "you'd better recycle" principle. It was the principle that reminded you not to litter and invited you to feel connected to the trees and rivers and stars. I still do see those lessons in this principle, but I see other lessons too. That we are not solitary beings making our way through this life. That our connections to others are a responsibility, yes, but also a privilege, and at times a saving grace. A few years ago, a young woman named Shelton set out to make a documentary. She was interested in filmmaking, had a summer free, and decided it would be exciting and educational to survey women in America. The challenge was to get a true cross-section of Americans. Shelton had an idea. She decided to capitalize on the most basic of connections, her name. Angela traveled all across the United States, looking up, calling, and visiting all of the other Angela Sheltons that she could find. As is the way with these webs, she had no idea where it would lead. No idea. "Is this Angela Shelton?" She would start her phone calls. "This is Angela Shelton." She had a few hang-ups. She also had successes, 40 of them. The Angela Sheltons she met that summer truly were a cross-section of America. They were wealthy and poor, young and old, black and white. They shared only a name. At least that's what they thought. The other connection that many of these women shared was one that the filmmaker was not prepared for. It was a silent thread that connected them strongly. What Angela Shelton discovered on this cross-country journey was that, like herself, 24 out of the 40 Angela Sheltons she spoke to had been sexually abused. This is what Angela writes. "My name is Angela Shelton, and I am not alone. I went searching for Angela Shelton when I made my documentary of the same title, and found that more than half of the women I spoke to share more than just their name. They were all survivors of rape, incest, or domestic violence. I found that connection to be sickening, especially because I also had been abused during my life. In hearing all of their stories, I felt that I was not alone in my pain and suffering. But making the film did not affect me personally, or so I thought, until I found an Angela Shelton who was tracking sexual predators. That particular Angela lived in the same town as my father, who abused me from ages 3 to 8. The woman tracking sexual predators who happened to share my name lived 5 miles from my father, and we arrived on Father's Day. After hearing all the stories of each Angela Shelton, she says, I was not only faced with my own story, I was faced with my perpetrator, with the Angela Sheltons as angels on my shoulder. I decided to knock on my dad's door for the first time in 12 years. The shock of what I did, she said, and the effects it had on me did not hit me until I edited the film and was faced with hearing my story over and over. I went through a lot of pain and self-discovery. The simple documentary I planned on making over the summer ended up changing my entire life. By telling my story over and over, it soon lost its hold on me, and the angels in each Angela Shelton inspired me to love myself and not only cope, but heal. It's an amazing story. The lessons that Angela Shelton learned on that trip across America have stayed with me ever since I saw the documentary Searching for Angela Shelton. Strength, forgiveness, faith, the power of the human spirit, the power of human connections. And she had no idea. She had no idea that these powerful connections to other women with her same name would affect her so deeply, or that she would find the inner strength to use this documentary to break the silence about the epidemic of abusive women worldwide. Denise Levertov once wrote a poem entitled Web. Intricate and untraceable, weaving and interweaving, dark strand with light, designed beyond all spiderly contrivance to link, not to entrap. Elation, grief, joy, contrition entwines, shaking, changing, forever forming, transforming, all praise to the great web. How many of you have caught glimpses of this intricate design? How many of you have felt a tug, reminding you of the invisible strands connecting us to one another? In 1996, my mother found herself at the Park and Ride in Rockland, where she was saying goodbye to friends after spending the day in Boston. As they stood talking, not yet ready to part, a young woman looking very distressed approached them. She was from Uruguay and was traveling by bus from Boston to Cape Cod. She had gotten off the bus in Rockland, thinking that she was in Sagamore, where she was to meet a friend for their weekend on the Cape. She had no way to reach her friend and no way to get to Sagamore now that the bus had departed. This is pre-cell phone. My mother and her friends brainstormed and came up with the solution that my mother would drive this young woman as far as Plymouth, where my mother lives, and from there she could get a bus to Sagamore and meet her friend. As they headed south, the young woman told my mother more about herself. She was 24 years old and working at an internship in Newton as an industrial designer. There was very little opportunity for industrial designers in Uruguay, especially for women. At first, when she came to this country, she was terribly homesick. She was lonely and overwhelmed by a culture so different from her own. She emailed her parents every day. But as the weeks and months went by, she made friends and gradually transitioned into thinking in English. She started traveling on weekends so that she could see more of the country. My mother told her that she reminded her of my sister, Sarah, who was then studying abroad in New Zealand. My sister, too, had spent her first few weeks being homesick and emailing home every day. Now, like this young South American woman, my sister was meeting new people and experiencing a new culture across the globe. When she hit exit 7 in Plymouth, where the bus station was, my mother kept driving. She drove all the way to Sagamore, to the waiting friend at the bus station there. When the young woman got out of the car, she thanked my mother and said, "I hope nothing like this happens to your daughter. But if it does, I hope someone like you will help her." 2 weeks later, we received an email from Sarah, who had been traveling for several weeks on the North Island. Sarah and 17 of her classmates, along with their professor, traveled in 3 cars to Gisborne, where one of the students, Foodie, lived on a marae, a village of Maori people. They were to spend some time there experiencing the culture and studying. Just a few miles short of their destination, one of the cars flipped over, rolled twice, and landed in a ditch. Miraculously, no one was hurt. My sister, watching this happen from the car behind, was terribly shaken. Safely at the marae, the students went directly to a welcoming ceremony led by the Maori of the village. After songs and speeches of welcome, each person was asked to introduce themselves. Sarah was first. She said, "I am Sarah Wilkinson, and I am from Plymouth, Massachusetts, USA, and I'm just glad that we all got here safely." And she burst into tears. A Maori woman went over to her then and wrapped her in her arms. In an email home, Sarah wrote, "It was the first hug I've gotten since I arrived in New Zealand, and it opened a floodgate of tears." Those 2 weeks with the Maori people were also the most wonderful and meaningful of her life thus far, she said. As near as we can figure it, these 2 events happened on the same day. My mother recounted that story in a letter she wrote to the residents of the nursing home where she was working at the time. A triangle of caring occurred between Uruguay, South America, Plymouth, Massachusetts, North America, and Gisborne, New Zealand, she wrote. A triangle of caring occurred across continents, across oceans, across ethnicity, across very disparate cultures. And once again, I am in awe of the interconnectedness of the human web. May we continue to reach out to each other. You can call it 6 degrees of separation. You can call it the interdependent web of all existence. You can call it a triangle of caring. The point is that we are not solitary beings making our way through this life. Our connections to others are a responsibility, yes, but also a privilege, a blessing, and at times, a saving grace. We are not all Kevin Bacon, but we are all part of the web. And when we are falling, it catches us. There is a living web that runs through us to all the universe, linking us each with each and through all life on to distant stars. The web is real. Our folly is that we so soon forget. Amen, and blessed be.